First of all, I would like to compliment Indic Researchers Forum for organizing this event on the occasion of the birth anniversary of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. It is a privilege to celebrate this day in honor of great spiritual leader who fought for independence of subcontinent from imperial forces and led a non-violent struggle called Khuday Khizmatgar. In fact, on the behalf of Pashtuns and Afghan across the Durian Line and around the world, I would like to thank our Indian people for conferring Bacha Khan with the highest civilian honor of India, which is called Bharat Ratna. I wish in this time of great rivalry and conflict, we would forcibly invent Bacha Khan's ideology to counter extremist forces that is destabilizing our region. So to discuss this, it's my privilege to have Professor Madhav Das Nalapat today, a prominent geopolitical expert with vast experience and expertise on this subject. I welcome you, sir. So basically, sir, I would like to start by asking you, what do you think about Bacha Khan and his legacy today in India? I mean, I know he's thought in Indian textbooks as Frontier Gandhi, and also he has. There is a famous market in Delhi which is named after him. But how relevant is Bacha Khan, according to you, in India and his ideology?
I'm a private citizen working in a private university. So allow me to be candid. The great work and heroic work and efforts of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan has frankly not been properly appreciated by successive governments in India or by the history books that have been created even in the decades after 1947. There has been mention, largely relating to his association with Mahatma Gandhi, but the reality is that from my point of view, and I'd like to say this as an individual who has had contact with your noble community in India quite extensively, and who has been following developments in the Pashtun territories across both sides of the Durand Line, I would say that Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan represented Pashtunwali, the hospitality, the Pashtun values, the Pashtun traditions, completely and totally. He was the very epitome and symbol of what Pashtun tradition going over more than 1,000 years is. I mean, you know, I'm sure you as an expert can track it very definitely for at least about 1,000 years. Possibly it could be more, but my own calculations are definitely for around 1,000 years. You have had a Pashtun tradition that remained unbroken until, if I may say so, the period when Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was marginalized in the new country that he became somewhat unwillingly, very unwillingly as a matter of fact, a citizen of, and that is Pakistan. Subsequently, Pashtun identity was further affected by the gigantic cultural revolution that was put into play in 1996 by no less an individual than US President William Jefferson Clinton. It is Clinton who ensured that the Taliban took over power in Afghanistan in 1996. The Taliban could not have gone through with this lightning capture of so many places, but for the hand-holding provided by the Americans and the money provided by their allies across the world who ought to have known better. I mean, frankly, back in the 1980s, when I was just starting off my geopolitical studies, I had many times pointed out that it was a huge mistake on the part of the United States. I think it was made first by Jimmy Carter and then followed by his successors. The mistake was to basically avoid handing over the power of fighting against the illegal, unjustified, cruel, oppressive occupation by the USSR of Afghanistan. This was a completely immoral and illegal occupation, and I am completely in agreement with those who say that. But the problem is, it ought to have been fought by the overwhelming majority of Pashtuns who were moderate, who wanted their sons and daughters to grow up as moderate, who wanted especially, who believed that their daughters and their wives and their sisters deserve the same equal treatment that is there in Pashtun tradition for women. And unfortunately, what happened was that it was not the huge majority of moderate Pashtuns who were assisted in this very necessary war against USSR occupation. I will not call it Russian occupation, I'll call it Soviet occupation. But instead, it was handed over to the Pakistan military, who promptly handed it over to a small fringe group of Pashtuns who were religious extremists. Frankly, these Pashtuns did not represent Pashtun values. They did not represent the great Islamic faith to which they professed to belong. They represented the Wahhabi variant. And that variant is an importation over about 300 years from Saudi Arabia, a country where the first Al-Saud to break away from that pernicious doctrine ever since they set out to take over Saudi Arabia is Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. So even in the land of its birth, Wahhabism has been abandoned today. But unfortunately, at that point in time, the United States saw Wahhabism as a useful ally. The British saw it initially as an ally against Turkish influence and occupation of Arab territories. Well, this is also not correct, because I don't believe any country has a right to occupy another country and another peoples. So obviously the Arab peoples were not happy about the way the Ottoman Empire was running their lives. And I'm a little surprised that the Congress leadership in that point in time supported an agitation to bring the Ottomans back. But that's a separate matter. They used Wahhabism in an effort to convince people in the peninsula, and very successfully so, that the Turks, many of whom followed a moderate Sufi version of Islam in their personal lives. Unfortunately, you cannot say that for their militaries, you cannot say that for some of the habits of their occupation, but in their personal lives in their home country, the overwhelming majority of them were definitely followers of Sufism. Now, this was regarded by Wahhabis as against the tenets of Islam, which is completely absurd. And may I, say that so it was very helpful for the West. First against the Turks in the Arab territories, then against Arab nationalists. Who can forget Ahmad bin Bella? Who can forget Gamal Abdel Nasser? Who can forget so many individuals who tried to forge a united Arab country out of the different Arab peoples? This effort was foiled, and it was foiled with the help of the Wahhabis, who again worked their poison and convinced elements of society that Ben Bella or Nasser or other leaders who were moderate and secular, but very, very strong practicing Muslims, were somehow antithetical to the Islamic faith. So it succeeded against them also. And nationalist regimes in these regions were overthrown and replaced by regimes that were essentially puppet regimes of the former colonial powers and the United States. I'm sorry that from the time of Vietnam onwards, the United States for a long time broke away from the legacy of Franklin Roosevelt and supported former colonial powers as they tried to hang on to their colonies. This was the origin of the mistake they made in Vietnam. This was the origin of many foreign policy mistakes made by the US to side with Europe, the former colonial powers there as they sought to reassert colonial influence against the tides of freedom. Well, unfortunately, the effort at Arab nationalism, at Arab unity failed. Again, Wahhabism was helpful. And finally, it was used against the Russians. Now, I'm not saying that it was wrong on any of these three parts to oppose what was there, whether it was Turkish occupation or whatever, or whether it was, frankly, some of the bad practices of some of these secular and moderate rulers in these countries. They were not perfect, they were not angels, but they were much better than what, the people who were seeking to replace them. And I'm not saying, I've said in the beginning, Russians were, the Soviets were completely wrong in invading Afghanistan, but the wrong weapons were used. Weapons that, frankly, have done enormous damage to the whole of human society. You can track 9/11 directly to the decision to install the Taliban in power in Afghanistan. You can track that directly. Of course, Bill Clinton is not going to be held up by any impeachment committee. He has been held. Nobody is talking of that particular link, but it is a reality. And it's not only the United States that suffered. The Afghan people suffered. The world suffered, and it is still suffering under this scourge of extremism, which is completely antithetical to any religious text and any religious doctrine that is followed in a philosophical sense in any part of the world. You can have extreme interpretations of any doctrine. You look at any doctrine, whether it is a doctrine of any doctrine, you will find it is possible to have extremist interpretations. Unfortunately, what the Wahhabis did was ensure that these interpretations multiplied. They were put on steroids by the West. And today what has happened, when the West has acknowledged and realized their danger, just as in Saudi Arabia, the Al Saud family has realized and recognized the danger, they have a new champion, and that champion is China. China has got an alliance with these forces for two reasons. One, in 9/11, you remember during that time, George W. Bush was focusing very actively on China. All of a sudden, 9/11 happened and that entire focus was lost. China became an ally from a target, from an enemy. And the enemy became countries in the Middle East. And that is what happened. The entire focus was changed. And of course, for a long time, Russia remained the focus. Today, I'm sorry to say, I'm quite sorry to say that once again, the Biden administration appears to be repeating the mistakes of the past and going back to a period when it is not China but Russia that is the main enemy. And frankly, they're completely ignoring the fact that Wahhabism has been put on steroids by communist China across the world as a means of subverting democracies, weakening democracies, including the country that is now that Joe Biden is the president of. I've gone into a little context about all this. What I want to say, I have always admired the Pashtuns for their nobility, for their decency, for their hospitality, and I weep at the effort to change the culture of the Pashtuns, and which unfortunately has been successful in too many people in this very noble community. And I pray that a time will come in the future when the ideals of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, when the example of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan is held up as an example of an individual who embodies the finest colonial traditions of your very noble people.
Thank you, sir. With the rise of the Taliban, people perceive Pashtun as extremists. You may have heard it in many times in the media. And this narrative and propaganda is set to portray a whole Pashtun nation as extremists, which is definitely not true. In fact, I was told by my friend, Mr. Arya, that word Pathan means, which is derived from Sanskrit, means the pride and honor. We people have always stood up in honor of our respect and pride. How do you think this fake narrative and propaganda against Pakhtun nation being extremist can be countered?
Well, I'd like to say that a giant step backward was taken on 15th of August, last year, when President Biden followed in the footsteps of Bill Clinton and reinstalled the Taliban to power in Kabul. It is one of the most damaging acts that can ever be done by US President to US security, but this gentleman did it. You're perfectly right that Pashtuns are not what they are portrayed to be. Partly, I would like to say it is because of our tendency, not just academics, but journalists and activists as well, to lump together entire populations under one particular rubric, to paint large groups of people with one particular hue, one particular color. If I may, again, I would request you for give me permission for some context, because this has to be, in a sense, given in context. I am an admirer of the Jewish community. For a very long time, I've been an admirer of the Jewish community, and I've admired the fact that, quite frankly, the Jewish community has done more, in my view, per capita than any other community has done in advancing knowledge and science across the world. And I have many Jewish friends in different parts of the world, mostly in the United States. I have never hidden the fact from them that in two things about Iran, a country which is occupying the minds of so many individuals of different communities in the United States. One, I requested US policymakers, when my private meetings with them, please don't use the word Iran when you mean the ayatollahs and mullahs of Iran. The ayatollahs do not represent Iran. Khomeinism does not represent Iran, and just as Wahhabism does not represent Islam. I remember long back, about 20 years ago, an individual who was supposed to be an expert in my region. I'm not going to name that person. That individual, in the middle of a conference in which I was also there, said that Wahhabism is the purest form of Islam. This was more than 20 years ago. This was by an American individual who held good positions and who subsequently held very senior positions in the US administrations, and not necessarily a Democratic administration, Republican administrations as well, and is even today regarded as a great authority in the region you and I come from. That Wahhabism is the purest form of Islam. Now tomorrow, if they say that Khomeinism is the purest form of one particular variant of Islam, I would dispute both. These are not in any way representative at all. They're not, so this is the tragedy. Always the word Iran has been used. When you've got a problem with the mullahs, you say, I have a problem with Iran. When you have a difficulty with the mullahs do something wrong, the ayatollah does something wrong, the Iran has done something wrong. In other words, everybody in Iran, you are tarring with that brush. So everybody in Iran gets the belief that you are basically against them. I'm seeing this at work today, very frankly, again, in a very, if I may say so, absurd and destructive manner against the community, the Hindu community. The reality is this is overall an extremely moderate community. I'm not denying that there are a few individuals there who frankly are fanatics, who frankly are terrorists, and who have committed actions that, in my view, should be prosecuted for acts of terrorism, such as killing an individual because of his diet, such as blocking individuals and objecting to individuals because of lifestyle. There are a few like that. But overall, this is a very moderate community. But what do you see? you see that for the actions of these few individuals, an entire community is being tarred and feathered in the United States, in Europe, all across different dialogue platforms, whether it is a press, whether it is television. And I'd like to say, Laila, that I am a proud believer in secularism. I have never hidden this belief in secularism. I have never hidden the belief that every religion should have equal rights. And my objection to some previous governments was they did not give equal rights to different religions. For example, the Hindu faith. The three, and there are only three, the three important shrines of the Hindu faith. If I may say so, there are shrines for the Christian faith. There are shrines for the Muslim faith. There are shrines for the Jewish faith. Jerusalem, for example, there are shrines there that are very precious to Jewish faith. Kashi, Mathura, and Ayodhya are the only three locations which are extremely important and central to the Hindu faith. And till very recently, all three were in the same condition that they came under the rule of a gentleman called Aurangzeb. And this gentleman overturned what had been basically protected by Mughal emperors, whether it was Shah Jahan, whether it was Jahangir. I'm not talking about Hindu rulers of the distant past. I'm talking about Mughal rulers. And these Mughal rulers preserved Ayodhya, Kashi, and Mathura. In fact, helped the rebuilding of some that had been destroyed by some fanatic individuals for entirely, if I may say so, wrong reasons. And I would only like to say that even these have not been restored so far to the Hindu community. And it is, and there are people in the West, they are friends of mine. Let me say very frankly, I have got the warmest regards, personal regards, for those individuals who today believe my country to be a location where genocide is routinely practiced, where the majority community are a bunch of fanatical individuals. I mean, they're completely wrong, but I mean, I have affection for them. But I'd only like to point out that, this is regarded by them as somehow against a particular faith. Was Aurangzeb the pure representative of the Mughal rulers? Or was Shah Jahan or Jahangir, under whose rule all this, a lot of the reconstruction happened in a particular one of these three, and in the others it was undisturbed? Or is it, is it Dara Shikoh, who should have been the Mughal emperor and not Aurangzeb? Dara Shikoh, who ensured the translation from Sanskrit to Persian of the classic Hindu epics. I would like to say Indic epics. I would not like to use the word Hindu epics because these epics transcend issues of faith. Let me say, in the Gayatri Mantra, it is very clear there is one supreme power. And we all know that whatever the faiths we belong to, we acknowledge one supreme power. And if you read and understand the Gayatri, you will understand that is central even to the Hindu faith. So Dara Shikoh got it translated from Sanskrit to Persian. And why was that revolutionary? Because Sanskrit as a language was not known by 99% of the population of India at that point in time, but Persian was known by about 15%, according to my research. So thanks to Dara Shikoh, these immortal epics that need to be absolutely must-read textbooks, that need to be studied in depth in schools and colleges across the world, not just in India. These epics became known to the broad population thanks to Dara Shikoh, a Mughal prince who ought to have been emperor rather than Aurangzeb, who destroyed the Mughal emperor. And after a brief interlude, in which the Marathas had the upper hand temporarily, the Western powers came in, and unfortunately for our country, they had the upper hand once again until finally this kind of rule was ended in 1947 to an extent. So I only want to say, it is not just the Pashtun community that has been tarred in this way so horribly. The Iranians have been tarred. I have been to Iran several times. In fact, my wife and I, we love going to Iran. It's, apart from the excellent food, even for vegetarians like me, the food is absolutely marvelous in Iran. The people are extremely friendly and hospitable, and they are nothing like the ayatollahs and the mullahs, which frankly I also meet while I'm in Iran, because I'm involved in a study of policy. When policy is made so significantly by ayatollahs, I have to talk to them. I'm not going to repeat the early mistakes made by the government of India after the 79 takeover by Khomeini. Khomeini rode on the back of civil society and took over in a matter of 2 or 3 years. And for years after that, senior ayatollahs who were extremely powerful would come to India, and they would come to the airport, and the customs officer, who are you? Open their luggage, throw it on the floor. They would not find a cab at the airport. Well, even some junior official in Tehran who had no power compared to these clerics and ayatollahs were given VIP treatment by government, because government did not understand who wielded the power in Iran. So that kind of mistake has been made, and that kind of mistake, I'm afraid, is also being made by democratic governments in other parts of the world, including sometimes by the United States, and systemically by China, which frankly associates power with position and cannot look at any power independent of position. So I'd only like to point out, the Pashtuns are not the only community. And I'd like to end this particular answer to your question. Again, I apologize for my lengthy replies. When you ask a professor who gives lectures in class, you must expect that brevity is not a strong point of his, and it's definitely not a strong point of mine. But I'd like to say that the Pashtun community has to act to save Pashtun traditions, Pashtun culture, Pashtun heritage. Why I'm so happy to appear on this platform together with you is that I know at least 15 years of your life, which I could track, you have devoted to this cause of recovering Pashtun tradition and Pashtun identity from the so-called Pashtuns who are enemies of that tradition and enemies of that identity. I think, I'm sorry, but there are not enough individuals such as you across the world, definitely not so much in Afghanistan, at least in the higher reaches of power. What has happened in Afghanistan? The women of Afghanistan, with one voice, they came and they tried to get educated. You yourself know the women of Afghanistan, how they wanted to be modern. They wanted to participate in society. They wanted to study. They wanted to work. And they were working. They were studying, with all the defects of the government of Hamid Karzai and Ashraf Ghani. Both of them are good friends of India. And I would like to say nice things about both of them. With all their defects, look at what is happening now in Afghanistan. Look at what is happening to women in Afghanistan now, and compare that with the relative freedom. It's not enough, I agree. Freedom is not enough in any part of the world. It's definitely not enough. It has never been enough in Afghanistan, even after 2001. But look at the way the women are being suppressed. Look at the way children are being suppressed. Young girls are being suppressed. And this reminds me of an era in India where, may I point out, certain groups of people were denied the right to read and write. Certain groups of people were denied certain occupations. And in my view, this is illegitimate, cruel, and uncivilized. One of the reasons why the Mughal invasion succeeded was that, according to my calculation, less than 8% of the Indian population at that point in time, Indian society at that point in time, was actually empowered or declared empowered to fight invaders, to fight at all. If the entire people had been incentivized to fight the invaders, believe me, no invader could have conquered India. Just 8% of the population, under some absurd notion of race or I don't know what identity. We all have the same DNA in India, I can tell you. Whether you're a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian, the identity is the same. And I'm very happy to say that one of the probably the most influential organization in India, the RSS, the head of that organization, who I have the privilege of knowing, and in fact, a year ago, I had the privilege of bringing him to my university, Mohan Rao Bhagwat. He publicly said, he publicly reminded India, everybody in India, that all of us are the same DNA. And this DNA is what unites us. Long back, Laila, before I think you were in college, definitely, possibly in school, I came up with something called Hindutva, in which I said the cultural DNA of India is a combination of the Vedic, the Mughal, and the Western. And all three are fused together in a common DNA. I remember once when the first Vajpayee government was in power, and there was a minister there, a very fine minister, if I may say so, a man of outstanding courage, who, I mean, he liked me, I liked him, despite the fact that our views were very different. And he was talking about, the Mughals and all that kind of thing, and all that horrible things that happened. And I reminded him that the food that they were eating at the table, including the food I ate, the vegetarian part of it, was Mughal food. The dress that his child was wearing was a Mughal dress. And the language in which the Bollywood movie that he liked so much and which you were discussing with me, that language is actually Hindustani, which is closer to Urdu in its spoken form than it is to not just Sanskrit, but Hindi. I mean, I regard Sanskrit as probably the most perfect language in the world. I would like to see a world where one day Sanskrit becomes the lingua franca of the whole world. It's, but it's going to take some while. And the reason why it's going to take a while is the knowledge of that was so heavily restricted. And this is the problem. This is what Afghanistan is facing. Knowledge, education, modern life is being completely restricted. And may I end by on a slightly more positive note. There was a gentleman called Murli Manohar Joshi, again a good friend of mine, who was the HRD minister during the BJP time. And, we used to meet frequently. And I must say, I've always liked him and I always admired a large part of what he used to discuss with me. And even as a minister, he was basically a professor. He never talked to me as a minister to a common citizen, but as one professor to another. And we discussed the idea, basically, and he was also very enthusiastic about that idea, which he implemented, by the way, that every religious institution, a madrasa, a Veda Pathshala, for example, should have internet access. So Murli Manohar Joshi, as HRD minister in the Vajpayee government, ensured internet access across these religious schools. Of course, many refused for some reason. Many accepted. And the logic was give them and some, alternative ways of thinking, some other, items, some other ways of looking at life beyond what they are taught every day in their classrooms, which was a very restricted syllabus. And I'm saying this is not only in the case of the schools of one particular faith, almost every particular faith, the religious schools, frankly, there's too much in them of too much concentration and too much avoidance of the fact that any great religion really borrows from other religions. And that is why Sanatan Dharma, and I think everybody in this audience is a Sanatani. Everybody in this audience. Why? Because Sanatan Dharma says that every path to the supreme force to the Almighty, to Jehovah, to Yahweh, to Allah, to Ishwar. Every path is valid so long as it leads to the supreme eternal reality that in my view has been so movingly immortalized in the Gayatri. So I want to say, Laila, that yes, it is a problem, but it's not entirely the problem of the rest of us. It's also a problem of the Pashtun community, and I think there need to be many more people who are active like you are, because if there are not, I can tell you this is going to continue.
Thank you, sir. As you know, you may have heard about the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement has been fighting a battle on its own to raise a voice against the atrocity committed against the Pashtun people and Afghan across the Duran line. And our leader, Manzoor Pashtun, has been advocating Bacha ideology of non-violence and peace. We want the international human rights community to hear the voice of helpless Afghan and Pashtun who have been victim of this great power struggle. Even you have advocated in India of supporting Pashtun nationalists. What made you come to this conclusion, and how do you think that is going to impact the geopolitics in our region?
Well, Laila, I'd like to say, as a scholar, I'm not, going to talk about political changes or redrawing of maps and boundaries, but I am going to talk of the issues that interest you, which is human rights, especially rights for underprivileged, rights for, across both genders, different lifestyles. I would like to say that in my research into Pakistan, and I would like to say very clearly that I regard myself as a friend of the people of Pakistan. In fact, for many years, after some important political voices, who are fortunately not that important any longer, blocked me from contributing anything to mainstream media, the only two large newspapers that gave me access were the newspaper of the Jamaat-e-Islami, which was Radiance, and the newspaper of the RSS, which was Organizer. I am very, very happy that both publications, of course, very much more in the Organizer than in Radiance, very much more in that. I'm very grateful to them, because I know in the case of Organizer, definitely, there was tremendous pressure brought upon the editors of Organizer through important people in the then government, which, by the way, was headed by a BJP Prime Minister, to block me from writing in Organizer, because I've written several articles pointing out some of the issues relating to some politicians who, frankly, I felt on very objective grounds were not suited to run this country or even run a political party. Well, I'm very happy to say at that time the RSS chief was K.S. Sudarshan. Twice he was approached, by the Prime Minister of the time. Why are you keeping this chap? And let him go. And the first time around, of course, he had asked for some kind of a dossier on me. And you know very well that agencies can come up with all kinds of dossiers. And unfortunately, many of them are fake dossiers, which is why so many of these dossiers, even when they're real, are not believed. So he was told that I am actually a CIA agent. That's a very common kind of practice. When I organized the first ever India-US-Israel trilateral in 2003, again, it was a Vajpayee government. The then National Security Advisor, Brajesh Mishra, was very clear, I should not hold this. Why? Because, again, the whole world will then catch fire and talk about a Jewish, Christian, Hindu conspiracy against Muslims. I said, I'm sorry, I don't accept this. This is not correct. Muslims are not like that. They're not going to go by any such kind of worry that you're talking about. This is absolute nonsense. And I went ahead with the conference. Well, official meetings were cancelled with the Jewish delegation that came. But I'm happy to say several ministers of the government of India and President Kalam, the President of India, Abdul Kalam, then the Home Minister of India and Deputy PM L.K. Advani, Defense Minister George Fernandez, Planning Commission Chairman K.C. Pant, many of these ministers, and if I'm, Murli Manohar Joshi, many of these ministers met the delegation, as in the records of their reception, Professor Nalapat plus 9, Professor Nalapat plus 12, Professor Nalapat plus 7 or 8. They met them because they said the Jewish people are friends of India, and Israel is a friend of India, the US is a friend of India, and we are going to meet you, but we cannot meet you officially because we have been blocked from doing so. So I came to their houses as friends of theirs, and they met me in their houses. The only individual who, frankly, met me in his office was K.C. Pant, the then Planning Commission Deputy Chairman. He met me and the delegation openly in his office, and frankly, I would like to say I admire all of those who met me and the delegations from Israel and the United States on that occasion for the courage they showed. And may I say, Laila, 2 or 3 items came in the newspaper. Oh, a huge amount of Jewish money has been paid to this chap. So I made a public request to any member of the Jewish community. I understand that you're giving me a lot of money. Please let me know the bank account so that I can access that money. Because as of now, even $1 has not been accessed by me. So please let me know the bank account. So in the same way, frankly, when I was asked about this, I just laughed, and I'm happy to say the RSS chief also regarded it as absurd. What was even more absurd, about 6 months after that, when my articles against a particular leader continued, and that particular leader went to the Prime Minister, what is all this? How can the RSS magazine, which at that time was edited by a very noble individual, a very brave and upright individual, Sheshadri Chari, who is, I'm happy to say, he has joined Manipal, and he is now Dr. Chari, and he is now teaching in Manipal and chairman of our China Center. I'm privileged to be his colleague. Well, after about 5 or 6 months, poor Brajesh Mishra forgot the initial dossier that he had sent and sent a new dossier that I was a Chinese agent. So Sudarshanji, I think, asked the Prime Minister, this man is both an American and a Chinese agent. He's such a versatile person that he must definitely keep writing for Organizer. A versatile man who can be at the same time a Chinese agent and an American agent surely is an extraordinary person. He had a good laugh. Vajpayee understood the situation and never bothered him again. And I continued to write for Organizer throughout, including the years when that particular leader enjoyed an extremely powerful position, if not the most powerful position in government of India. And I'm happy to say, at that point in time also, frankly, neither the Prime Minister nor the Home Minister of that for some time. There was, unfortunately, after some time, there was a change in one particular Home Minister. But at that time, they did not join this effort to gag my voice simply because I was being critical of a politician. I am proud to say that the RSS resisted that gag order and stood up against a government led by its own a party which everybody says it is very close to. So I'm happy to say that, even an organization which is as powerful as the RSS, the head of that organization has publicly said that the DNA of every Indian is the same. Exactly what is said by all of us who are for so long, and which is true. And that is where this kind of effort at communal tension makes no sense. We are a united people, and and therefore I would like to say, the same way I would like to say, Indians are not a fanatic community. Certainly, no community is fanatic. And the way the Western, elites and intellectuals are tarring the Hindu community is something that is as revolting as the way they tarred the entire Iranian community at one time, and they are tarring the Pashtun community today. I agree with you. This does not represent, this small fringe does not represent Pashtuns. And I'd also like to say very clearly, I'm sure finally the truth will prevail. Whether the truth about the Hindu community or the truth about the Pashtun community, one day that truth will prevail. And in that time, what I want to go back to is my research into Pakistan. As I said, Pakistan Observer, a Pakistan newspaper, gave me a column for more than a decade, and a column in which, frankly, I was very, they requested me very carefully to keep out of certain subjects which the military would not like very much. Even then, I came into the subjects which I thought were harmless, but many of them, the military protested against that also, I'm told. So I have extremely warm feelings towards the people of Pakistan. But unfortunately, they are being controlled by the army. And the army is controlled by a single ethnic group in Pakistan. And that too, not a single ethnic group, but a particular part of the province of that ethnic group. The Potiawar part of Punjab. So this is the problem. And this is why this is why I'm saying.
Sorry to interrupt you. My question was, sir, that how can we, get the support of international community? As you said before, that Pashtun are, and they need to come out. There need to come more women to speak up. As you have seen recently, Manzoor Pashtun had, took a lot of demonstration around Pakistan, and he was shot. His car was shot 11 times. And my question is, how can we get the support from the international community? I don't see it in the international media that Pashtun has been going out to protest against the Taliban ideology. They are trying to represent the Bacha ideology. How can we, propagate that? How can we advocate for it? How can we get the support?
I'd like to say that if you look at the roots of this problem, the roots lie in military rule in Pakistan. And the Pakistan military has always supported Pashtun fanaticism against Pashtun moderates and Pashtun nationalists, such as yourself. Always. And that is where, unfortunately, so many people in so many countries, so many governments are supporting the Pakistan military. I think it is very, very clear that what the military is doing in Pakistan, first of all, the narrow ethnic base of the military. Secondly, the way that military is putting certain unfortunate and regressive and extremist tendencies on steroids. The way such tendencies are getting support from a country to the north of India. All this has to be highlighted, plus the reality that Afghanistan under the Taliban can never be anything other than a living hell for the people of Afghanistan, whether they're Uzbeks, they're Tajiks, they're Hazara, or they're Pashtun. And this is something appreciated by all our Central Asian neighbors, which is why all the Central Asian neighbors are so close to India. I want to say something in terms of theology. I have read the theological books of many faiths, including the Bible and the Holy Quran. And in my admittedly inexpert view, the only deciding force whether an individual goes to heaven or hell in the afterlife is in the afterlife. From what I understand, you can do a lot of bad things and one single good thing can redeem you. You can do a lot of good things and one single bad thing can consign you to hell. And this is decided not by any human being. It's not written, it is not, decided not by anything other than the word that comes directly from the divine entity, not by any other interpretation or any other scholar than this. But today, I'm sorry to say, you have multiple scholars who are misleading youngsters in particular. I've seen this from the beginning when I started tracking the psychology of the suicide bombers. And if I was one of the first to write about the possibility of modern women and modern men becoming suicide bombers. This was before 9/11. And, why? Because they were attracted by individuals who said, we have the keys to your pathway to paradise. If you do this, this, and this, you will assuredly go to paradise. In my opinion, such individuals just assured themselves a ticket to hell according to the word of God as revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. Because only the Almighty has the power to decide who will go to paradise and who will go to hell. No other force or certainly no human being has the power, and that power is exercised only in the afterlife. So all those this is the problem, and this is something which frankly has to be understood. And that, therefore, Leila, within, if I may say so, the Muslim Ummah itself, I am very happy to see so many welcome changes. From the beginning, and I know this is not popular with many individuals, maybe even not you, from the very beginning, I have defended Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, being quite aware that he is less than a perfect democrat, because, in my view, the big takeaway is his delinking from Wahhabism and the way in which women, for example, are slowly getting more and more power, admittedly much less than what is needed in Saudi Arabia. Now, Indonesia. Now, Mohammed bin Salman, he has been called all kinds of names for certain activities. Now, I'd like to say that from my reading of not only Saudi Arabia, but many other countries, if you try regime change in those countries, actually attempt regime change, there is only one thing that it is likely to happen to you, and that is very unpleasant. It's not only Saudi Arabia, the same thing goes for other countries as well. There's a very large country to our north where that goes very equally well. Many other countries as well. You try regime change, well, you have very severe problems. But the reality is the big picture. Don't lose the big picture and details. Indonesia. Joe Biden has gone and sanctioned the Indonesian military. Why? Because a lot of individuals said human rights in Indonesia are in a terrible shape. Well, may I point out that Wahhabism has been leaping ahead and, at a furious pace in Indonesia. And frankly, this is a grave danger. And the current government is definitely not supporting that. In fact, in Indonesia, there is the setting up of a Holocaust memorial to memorialize the Jewish people who were killed under that maniac Adolf Hitler. I think that's an extremely important step. And when I went to Jakarta for the first time, I was very surprised to see pork being sold in the markets of Jakarta, openly being sold. I went to Jakarta as the world's biggest Muslim country, and I saw pork being sold freely in Indonesia. So I would like only to say this government has been sanctioned. Al-Sisi in Egypt has been sanctioned. Yes, Al-Sisi is far from a democrat, but he's a little better than the Muslim Brotherhood, if I may say so, which is very, very Wahhabi. And he's certainly, regarding Israel, regarding India, regarding women, regarding secular policies, he's certainly adopting a line which is very different from that which the Morsi government was inching towards. So I want to say, please knock some sense into the folks in Washington. I'm happy to say that Prime Minister Modi is showing very high common sense in such matters. We are very friendly with Iran, and we are friendly. In fact, when for some time India stopped buying Iranian oil during the time of Donald Trump, I publicly opposed it. I said this is wrong, and whatever the US said, we should continue to buy Iranian oil, because not the Iranian people who are our enemy. It is maybe a handful of people who are the enemy of the United States. And you are targeting an entire people. I've seen how sanctions bite in Iraq. I've seen how sanctions bite in Iran. I've seen how millions of ordinary people suffer, go hungry, go unemployed, and many die. And this is cruel. These people had no role in choosing their leaders. They had no role in the government or its policies. Why is the West punishing them? And you now sanction Al-Sisi in Egypt, you sanction Indonesia, and then you invite Pakistan to a democracy conference. I don't understand it. A country dominated by the military, you invite Pakistan to the democracy conference. I'm happy to say that in the Olympics, Prime Minister Modi and External Affairs Minister Jaishankar ensured that India boycotted the Beijing Olympics. I'm happy that all our South Asian partners boycotted the Beijing Olympics, except a country which unfortunately is completely in the grip of China, which is Pakistan. And what happened to BRICS? Which are the BRICS countries that are, at the conference, except R and C? I don't see Brazil, frankly. I don't see South Africa at this Olympic meeting. I'm very happy my Prime Minister took that decision. And I wish people in America would understand some of the reasons why this tilt towards Russia and this tilt towards, catching hold of some chap who is now considered the head of some ISIS or something as a huge event. Osama bin Laden, symbolically, huge event. Yes, this, frankly, insignificant event. So it is the Sino-Wahhabi alliance that is the problem in the United States. And please don't drive Russia any closer to China than you already are. Xi Jinping has met with Putin and promised him, don't worry what Western sanctions are imposed, we will rescue your economy. So he's completely going to be beholden to Xi, and the US and the West will have no leverage over him. So tomorrow he invades other parts of Ukraine. He invades Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. Do you think NATO is going to intervene and send troops? Do you think Germany, France, and the US are going to send troops? No. So my request is, please, you can help your cause, but it's part of a broader miscellany of causes. And in your cause, please ask all your friends to fight against military rule of the people of Pakistan, to fight against ethnocentric rule of the people of Pakistan, including those who are Pashtuns, Baloch, Sindh, Muhajir, Shia. And in Afghanistan, please fight the Taliban. And I can say, at least India is doing much more to stand up to the Taliban than the United States and the UK and some Western friends of ours are doing. And I think the root of the problem is the military in Pakistan and the Taliban in Afghanistan. And that root, if you ignore that root, no matter what cosmetic gestures you have towards supporting, if I may say so, towards supporting the Pashtun rights, even across the Durand line. And the Durand line, frankly, it's no longer valid. In terms of international law, it's no longer valid. So this struggle will come when the moderate Pashtuns will win, real Pashtun identity will win, when the military is taken back to the barracks in Pakistan and the Taliban is once from power.
Before we end the session, and you are right, with the recent activism I watch in Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, I can see that, they are raising the question about the Durand line and uniting against the Taliban. But the last question I have before we end, since Pashtun and Indian have had civilizational link, and this is missing right now, I would just ask you, is there any chance we could work on this in this situation, which is needed, I believe, to interact more with the Indian people and to remind ourselves our civilizational link, which is missing. And I believe this is needed. What is your thought on it? If you can say it in few words before we end the session.
I'd like to say I completely agree with you. and it's extremely important to do this. And may I say that I have some Pashtun friends, including some Pashtun Hindus, who had to leave Pashtun territories in both sides of the Durand line. And they introduced me to several Pashtuns way back in 2000, 2001. I was even introduced to members of the Taliban from Jalalabad and from Kandahar who are visiting Delhi. And in fact, even today, several leaders who are Taliban, their children, their families are studying in India. And frankly, I'm okay with that. I was told by a Pashtun friend, I don't know if this is right or not, that there are some 600,000 Afghans, mainly Pashtuns, living in India. And I would like to say, I have not heard anything negative about any of them. The Pashtuns are a model community in India. They do not participate in any kind of tensions or violence or rioting of any kind whatsoever. They're a model community. And I think it's important to reach out to the Pashtun community in different parts of the world, including in the big democracies, India, United States. And I think there are Pashtuns in the UK as well. There are even Pashtuns in Germany. Reach out to that global Pashtun diaspora, because I can tell you almost all the members of this diaspora are ambassadors to tell the truth and help you in your cause. And I'd like to say, in the case of India, our diaspora in the United States has been of immense help. And I've seen this right from the early 1990s in bringing together India and the United States. The governments have often not been on the same page. Academics have not been on the same page. Businesses have sometimes not been on the same page. The people of the United States have been on the same page, including with their Indian American friends. So the Indian Americans are model citizens, just as Pashtuns are model citizens in India. If they're citizens.
Yeah. And thank you, Professor Nalapat, for taking time and having this important discussion. I hope this is not the last interaction and Pashtun is having with an Indian counterpart. I hope with the time this interaction and our people between us increase. I would like to congratulate Indic Researchers Forum for taking this initiative of in bringing the people together.